Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Fiona Morley, and I'm Head of Digital Programs and Information Systems here in Maynooth University Library. You're all very welcome to this event, which we're hosting as part of Maynooth University's Research Week. Research Week runs from the 18th to the 22nd of October, and it coincides with or is close to Open Access Week and Academic Integrity Week. And during this time, the university invites the public to hear about and engage with the rich body of multidisciplinary research being undertaken here. The Maynooth University Library contributes our own series of events to the main university programme as part of Research Week. We focus on highlighting developments, supports and services that promote research, as well as highlighting areas of interest to our own university community, the library community, and to others. So I'll hand over now to Helen Fallon, Deputy University Librarian here in Maynooth University Library, who will introduce our speakers and chair this session. Over to you, Helen.
Okay, thanks very much, Fiona. That was great. As Fiona said, I'm Helen Fallon and I'm Deputy Librarian here, and I do have a very strong interest in academic writing, so I'm really delighted to have two such prestigious speakers with us today. And I've been working in libraries for quite a long time, and it's really great now that there are a lot more librarians writing, publishing, working on books, editing books, etc. So it's a very exciting time in the profession. So we're going to start with Claire Sewell, and Claire is going to talk for about 15 minutes, and she has a presentation. Then we'll take questions and any discussion on Claire's presentation, and then we'll go on to Claire McGuinness, who will talk for about 15 minutes, and again, 10 minutes or thereabouts for questions and discussion. You can put your comments or questions into the chat box, but also, as well as checking the chat box, we will have an open forum as well. So without further ado, can I introduce Claire Sewell, who is Research Support Librarian for the Physical Sciences at the University of Cambridge, where she oversees training and support for the research community across disciplines. She is currently serving as President-elect for School Library Association, SLA Europe, and is an Associate Editor of New Review of Academic Librarianship. She recently published her first book, The No-Nonsense Guide to Research Support and Scholarly Communication with Facet. So over to you now, Claire.
Thank you. Wonderful introduction. Just see if I can get the tech to work. Oh. Okay, so thank you for having me today. I bought my prop, so this is what I'm here to talk about. This is actually the library copy. I'm coming to you from the Betty and Gordon Moore Library in Cambridge today, and I'm going to talk to you just briefly about sort of some of my own personal experiences of writing, and I will sort of preface what I'm going to say by saying these are my experiences. I'm aware that they might be slightly different to other people's. It's not representative. This is just kind of how it happened to me. And it was sort of something that just sort of happened, and I'm still not entirely sure how. So a little bit of background. I was asked in November 2017 by the good people at Facet Publishing if I wanted to submit a proposal to write a book on my job, which was in research support. And this was for a couple of reasons. My previous role to the one I have now, I was the Research Support Skills Coordinator, which is an incredibly fancy way of saying that I used to look after the kind of education and development of library staff in learning all about different areas of research support and then how they could actually go on and support the research community. Because obviously University of Cambridge, very research intensive institution, there are 114, I think, libraries across the university as a whole, or affiliated with the university, and there's roughly about 400 library staff. So it was a somewhat unique role, I think, particularly in the UK, where scholarly comms and research support was a developing area. So I think because of my job, I sort of came to the attention of people, but I was sort of known for doing this. And when I first started that role in 2015, I think the end of 2015, it was quite a new thing in the UK. There wasn't an awful lot of training materials in this area with the UK focus out there. So I think because I put my training materials out there as I was developing them, I think my name just kind of got associated with this area. So that's probably one reason why I got this approach from Facet. my job meant I was writing a lot in professional press. So I wrote articles for newsletters, I did blog posts and guest blog posts and things like that. I presented at a couple of conferences, Lilac probably being one of the more notable ones. I talked about this area a lot. I wasn't shy about talking about it, and I was quite heavily involved with CILIP at the time as well, somewhat lesser extent now, but sat on various committees, part of various groups. I took part in their leadership program, I think in 2014 or 15, something like that. So they knew who I was in a certain way. So that might have been why I had this approach. And I know that perhaps not everybody is lucky enough to have an approach that you more have to go and put yourself out there, but I'd sort of accidentally done that anyway before the book thing came along. And the other thing that you should know about writing this book, and I do not say this to get any sympathy at all, but I was asked to do the book proposal in November 2017, and about 2 or 3 months before I lost my mother, unfortunately, rather suddenly. She passed away. And so the book was almost my sanity project, something else to do of an evening that wasn't dealing with that. So it wasn't dealing with paperwork or anything. It was just something else that I could use to occupy my mind. So that was something that was quite useful for me when writing the book. But obviously, hopefully, other people won't have that kind of background. But just sort of keep that in mind as we go through the presentation, that I had my own sort of reasons for doing it. Anyone who's looked at any of the book will see that I have no design skill whatsoever, as you can tell by some of the diagrams that are in there. So forgive the very crude representation that we've got going on here. Basically, these white circles at the top, everything above the line was what I thought it was going to be like. I thought I would write the proposal, then I'd write a draft. It would go off to be edited and then it'd be published and everything would be wonderful. But below the line, that's kind of like my annotated narrative of what actually happened. So firstly, I should say the proposal was based on an existing one I'd written, I think about a year or so before, in response to a call in the US, I think, for a similar sort of book. I put together this proposal, not exactly the same, but covering a lot of the same areas. And then I just never heard anything back. I think I got an acknowledgement that said we've received it and then never heard anything else. So I took that as a no. And I don't think the book ever actually got published that they were after. So in some ways, actually, it was that made it easier to fill out the proposal from Facet when I had to do that. Now, the proposal document was a very long document, 5 to 7 pages, something like that. Very detailed, much more detailed than I was expecting. I wouldn't say I was insulted to be asked to write a proposal. I was kind of, well, you asked me to write one, therefore that somewhat implies that you want me to write a book at the end of it. Why do I have to bother writing a proposal? But, you know, it's the process, so that's what you do. And actually, it turned out to be a good thing to do. I can see why they make people do it, because it forced me to think about what the book could be, what I was capable of writing, who the audience was, what kind of topics I would cover, and that sort of thing. So how would I go about distilling this incredibly complicated topic into a single, and as it turns out, relatively thin volume? I promise it looked a lot thicker than this when I was actually writing it. But actually doing the proposal was a really good exercise for my own professional development, my own knowledge of how this works. So it kind of worked out in the end. Then, of course, I went away and I wrote a draft. Then I wrote another draft. About 5 or 6 drafts later, I had a slight panic because I was like, I'm looking at the deadline's getting a bit close. And I will confess, I missed at least the first deadline, if not the second. But I did give myself an incredibly tight deadline. I can see Claire nodding as well. So from what I know of anyone who's written a book, deadlines are somewhat meaningless in this space. So luckily, Facet were incredibly understanding about this. So I went through several drafts of individual chapters, several drafts of the book as a whole. And then when it was finally ready, I sent it off to the editor. And you do get to say fancy things like, oh, I've submitted the manuscript to the editor. And it does make you feel like quite posh and quite pleased with yourself when you get to say things like that. But then reality hit, because I kind of thought, oh, I've submitted it now. That's kind of somebody else's problem. I'm done. I can celebrate. So even though it might be like your 10th draft of a book, this is the same with any kind of writing, as I'm sure people will know. Even if it's like your 10th draft of something, it's likely to be the first or maybe second or third complete draft that your editor has seen. They'll have comments. That's what they do. That's their job. They'll question things. They'll slightly pull things apart. You have to write more drafts on the basis of this. You have to go back and forth a lot. So I actually submitted the final manuscript probably 5 or 6 months before actual publication, maybe 4 or 5 months before, but there was quite a lot of toing and froing after submission. And then, of course, you know, once it's published, yeah, you have a big celebration and you can do all this publicity. And publicity is another thing that you don't actually think about, that you might actually have to talk to people about having written a book. You might have to promote it in some way, because basically the publisher is in it to make a little bit of money. So, you know, they want the book to sell. Unfortunately, the book came out in January 2020, and as we all know, there was kind of something else going on the first few months of 2020 that somewhat derailed any plans for publicity. So in some ways, I got off quite lightly with the publicity. I think I wrote a blog post for CILIP, which came out in about the February, and then March 2020 happened, and nobody really wanted to know about the book. So that was kind of like the warts and all process of doing it. Obviously, there were benefits, both personal and professional, to writing a book. As much as I sort of hate to admit it, it did give me an insight into the actual publication process, which has helped me to communicate with the researchers that I now teach and deal with. It does help to be able to say, when I was writing a book, or yes, I understand that the peer review process is a pain and can take a long time. It helps inform your practice in a way, and it means that the students take you a little bit more seriously, which is sad in a way, but it's true, and that's how the world works. So it has helped in my actual job to have that insight from beginning to end of how the publication process for a book works. It did help to raise my professional profile, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't be here talking to you today. But it helped to sort of get my name out there and get it even more associated, I think, with that particular topic, which, as I'm planning on working in academic libraries and going for that sort of role in the future, is quite a nice little ace to have up my sleeve. You know, just turn up to job interviews and go, literally wrote the book on it. Here we go. Please give me the job. I've not done that, I promise. It helped me to think about a different way of communicating, because I've written a lot of other things over the past 20 or so years that I've worked in the library. So lots of blog posts, newsletter articles, one peer-reviewed article that I've written that I'm insanely proud of. But I'd never done anything like this on this scale. And the way I approached it, which may or may not be the right way of doing it, is that there are, I'm going to have to check, I want to say 9 chapters in this book. 8 chapters in this book, and I wrote each of them separately and then put them together at the end. And that's perhaps not the right way of doing it with something like this, because I had to sort of think, okay, I've mentioned this in chapter 5. Have I mentioned this anywhere else? Do I need to explain it again, or am I repeating myself? So it taught me a lot about a different way of actually communicating with people, aside from the length of the thing, you know, a different way of writing and a different way of introducing this topic. Because I was relatively new to both the research support role, and the research support was a fairly new concept in Cambridge, certainly, but the UK at large, I would say in 2015. When I first started, there wasn't an awful lot out there. I had to do a lot of on-the-job learning. I had to go out and find my own training. So it was a really good way, writing the book, of consolidating what I'd done over the past 3 or 4 years and putting together all of the stuff I had learned about. So hopefully someone else coming to the role didn't have to do all that scrabbling around at the beginning. You know, there's something here that can help you. And it did help to increase my own confidence in the knowledge that I'd gained as well. I'm not a confident person by nature. I'm very shy and very introverted. If you ever met me at a party, I'm the person hiding in the corner. But it did help to make me think that maybe I actually do know what I'm talking about, that I've been asked to write this thing and I've written it and people have actually read it. And, you know, it's perhaps not too terrible. So And then, of course, I have to mention the fact, yes, I did get paid for it in this. So I did get royalties from the different copies sold. It's not enough to retire on, sadly, but it's nice to have that extra money, especially in a pandemic situation. You know, I was able to afford to do like one little project in the house, one little redecorating project. So I didn't make a fortune, but yes, I did get some money, and yes, that's a nice thing. I should also point out, and if you remember nothing else from this talk, this is one thing to take away. There's something called the Authors, I always get this wrong, Authors Lending and Collecting Society, the ALCS. Look them up after the session today. They are people, nice people who collect, not royalty payments, but like when things are photocopied or when things are uploaded to a VLE, you'll get like 20p a copy. This adds up. That was quite a nice surprise when I claimed that check when it came through last March, I tell you. Really, really cheered me up at the start of the pandemic. Obviously, for balance, some things did not go so well. This was a book based purely on my practice, not research. And I didn't know how to really approach that, because if you're writing an academic book that's based on research, there are formulas out there that you can follow. There's an expected way of writing and communicating this information. With this, it was based on practice. So I just sort of had to dive in and come up with the structure myself. The content is very heavily based on what I used to do as a job. And I have to be conscious that that's perhaps not the best structure for everybody. I had to think sort of, okay, I'm used to teaching just librarians in Cambridge who work in a certain system. But, you know, there are librarians outside Cambridge who need to know about this stuff. How do I communicate with them? How do I get them to know what they need to know? So that was a bit of a challenge and a bit of a hurdle to overcome. And we could potentially argue that, you know, the order that I put things in is not the most helpful order, but it's the one that I went with because it's what I know. Scholarly communication is a very, very fast moving area, and the amount of extra things I had to add in when I was writing this book. If anyone knows research support and open access tool, there's something called Plan S, which I think came out end of 2018, basically just as I'd almost finished the draft of the open access chapter. The entire landscape of open access changed by this like one thing that came out. And so I had to go and write something else in the book. So it was a lot to try and keep on top of. But I had to come to terms with the fact that it was only ever going to be a snapshot. So in a book form, you can't always keep up with the latest information out there. I need to acknowledge the elephant in the room I've slightly skipped one there. I've started, so I'll finish. I need to acknowledge the elephant in the room that I work in an area of research support, which is about helping researchers make their knowledge more widely accessible and essentially freely available. This retails, I looked it up just before now, for about £60. So there is a conflict there between what I'm writing about, the values that I try to live by in my work, and, you know, writing a for-profit book. I had to sort of weigh up the pros and cons of doing this. And I know everyone would think money is a factor, but that wasn't the deciding factor. It helped that it was written for a library association. So in theory, profits will be ploughed back into the profession in some way. That helped ease my conscience slightly. But also, I felt that the experience of actually doing it and having that experience of writing an academic book and going through that would add so much to my own practice. And when was I ever going to get this chance again? So I said yes, but it wasn't without conflict. And I have had quite heated arguments with people who disagree violently with what I've done. And we can have those arguments in the Q&A session if you like. Because of the way that contracts work at Cambridge, this was all written in my own time. It wasn't a work project. A lot of it was written on overtime at the help desk in the main university library. But you really need to keep your motivation in mind if you're doing this sort of thing in your own time, because you're doing it all day, 9 to 5, and then you come home and your evening is doing it all again, and there's no escape. And that can get very wearing at times. So you do have to sort of, if it's not something that's part of your job, just think about that and plan it a little bit. And then, of course, it's flipping hard work to write a book. There's a lot of words, there's a lot of late evenings and lost weekends, and I don't want to underestimate how much work it was, but if you keep your motivation in mind, I think it does help. And then I'm aware I might be slightly going over time, but just a few top tips, and this really applies to any kind of writing that you do, but I can promise you, whatever time scale you give yourself to write a book, tack 6 months at least onto the end of it, because life happens, it gets in the way. You know, unexpected things will happen. You might just want to sleep occasionally, or go out and see your friends and sort of do things and have a life. So do build that extra time in. Don't be too hard on yourself. Luckily, the publishers were incredibly understanding of my constant need to go, I haven't finished it yet. Can we push the deadline on? And I would also say, for your own process, build in some mental health breaks when you're writing, especially if you're writing about something that you do as a job, because it can become overwhelming, especially if you've had a really bad day. As I said with the drafts earlier, you have to be prepared to take constructive criticism, even if it's like the best you think it can be. I guarantee once it's submitted that they'll want changes to be made, and that can be quite hard to take, because you're like, I've worked on this is the best. I can't describe open access in a different way. But actually the editors and people are there to help you, and there to ask you the awkward questions. And I did get a better book out of it at the end than went in. Always remember why you're doing it. So that might be money, you might be saving for a Caribbean cruise, it might be to build your professional reputation, might be for all sorts of reasons. For me, it was that personal reason of having an extra sanity project. But keeping that motivation in mind really helped me to get through it, because there were times when I was in tears, I won't lie. You know, there were times I never wanted to see a computer keyboard ever again, but it all worked out in the end. And then just for the final couple, I would say be flexible, because the end product, it does relate to the proposal I put in. It's not the book I had in mind when I started writing, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. And do try and have fun with it. Make of it what you can. It's an incredible opportunity. I'm very privileged to have been able to do it. And just try and have fun with it and learn from it. And even if it's a horrible experience, once you've written it, you never have to do it again unless they contractually want a second edition. So that was all I was going to say. And if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take them. Oh, Helen, you're on mute.
Thank you very much, Claire, for such an interesting and honest presentation. Now, just to so that we can see everybody, do you stop screen sharing at this point?
There we go.
Now, we had a comment in the chat box, but I'm not sure if we have any questions as such from Niamh O'Brien, that you read Claire's book while doing the MLS and would highly recommend it. And also there's lots of wonderful talk, Claire, from the heart, and thanks. So I'll just open to the floor. If you want to, if you have a camera, if you can switch on your camera and also unmute. If you don't have a camera, that's fine. Niamh has her hand up actually. So Niamh, will we let you go first?
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, my camera is not operating today.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks for writing the book, because it came out while I was doing my thesis research. So I had it like on reserve in the library waiting for me when it came in UCD. And I could really relate to Plan S throwing a spanner in the works, because I did my thesis on Plan S. And there was a big change like 2 weeks before my thesis was due. So, you know, I really related to that. But yeah, no, I just wanted to say that I found the book a fantastic resource for myself in understanding the area. And it was, yeah, great to have something so up to date that captured the time period that I was also writing about. So I just wanted to say, like, thanks for contributing to like the knowledge base around scholarly communications.
And thank you for reading it.
Thanks for that. Anybody else, if you want to either raise your hand or just unmute?
I can see some comments sort of popping up at the bottom of my screen talking about honesty. I hope that wasn't too honest. I was sort of going for balance, you know, and I'm aware that, you know, everyone's situation is different, but didn't want to sit here and tell you it was all sunshine and roses, because there were swear words mixed in, definitely, at some point. Especially the Plan S thing was definitely a swear word at that point.
I think too, one of the things, a few things, there are many things I took away from this excellent presentation, but what you say there is very true about your name becoming associated with something, a topic or an area, and out of that, once you start presenting at conferences or doing blog posts, it builds from that. So it's just so important that we are all, you know, visible and out there. You mentioned something which I wanted to check with you, Claire. What's the relationship between Facet and CILIP?
So as far as I understand it, don't quote me, but Facet is CILIP's publishing arm.
Oh,
It is a commercial business in its own right. I mean, it's a publisher, it exists to make money, right? But if you, and I checked this earlier, on the back of the title page of any Facet book or somewhere, perhaps it's on the back, somewhere, I've definitely read something that says that because it's connected to the Library Association, they do push a certain portion of their profits back into CILIP or whichever library association they're connected with.
Mm.
I don't know how much of the profits realistically. I won't name numbers, but I've seen, for example, like when I got my royalty statement, I saw how much they made and I saw how much I made. And there was quite a large gap, but it's what I signed up to. So, you know, fair enough. I think I got something like 10% of each one sold. So you can draw your own conclusions. But when I was weighing it up, whether I should accept an offer to publish from a commercial non-open access publisher, that did help a little, thinking, well, there are worse publishers out there. I don't want to call publishers evil, because, you know, they're not. They're trying to make money at the end of the day. It's what they're there for. But having that Facet connection as well, so being related to CILIP or embedded with CILIP, it helps to get the book out there to the right people as well, because hopefully people know that Facet is a library publisher and they can go to them.
Great, thanks. Anybody else? Any questions or comments? So you can either put up your hand or just unmute and speak. If not, we'll go on to Claire next, and then our second Claire. After Claire McGuinness, we will have time again for some more questions and discussion. So if I can introduce Claire, and Claire, if you want to get your presentation up, start sharing. Claire McGuinness, and I should say Dr. Claire McGuinness, is Assistant Professor and Deputy Head of School at the School of Information and Communication Studies at UCD. She has taught multiple information and digital literacy modules and currently leads several courses on UCD's MLIS and BSc Social Sciences program. The Academic Teaching Librarian's Handbook with Facet is her third book, following Becoming Confident Teachers, a Guide for Academic Librarians in 2011, and Digital Detectives, co-authored with Crystal Fulton in 2016. So thank you very much, Claire.
Thank you so much, Helen, for the introduction, and hi to everyone. It's lovely to see you all. I know quite a few of you, I think, so really appreciate you coming to listen to the talk today. And just to say, I really enjoyed the other Claire's talk. I just found it so interesting, and I recognised so much of what you said, Claire, about the process of writing and redrafting and all of that. So I'll just, I suppose, share my own experience, which is different to Claire's experience, because writing is part of my job, and it is something that I suppose I have to do, which I have to write. So it is different. But I'll just kind of talk you through, I suppose, the process of this particular book, and I have my prop as well. This is the actual physical book itself, which took a long time to arrive, but more of that later. Just, I suppose, a little bit, I mean, Helen has already given you an introduction to who I am, but just, I suppose, for context, and to tell you a little bit about, I suppose, why I would be writing a book about this particular topic, academic librarians and their teaching. I am, or I suppose I was, and I originally was, and I guess I still am, a librarian. And I completed my MLIS way back in 1995. And I worked for a few years in a health sciences library before returning to academia to do PhD and I guess I've never left academia, but I still consider myself very much a librarian. All my academic career has been devoted to libraries and librarianship, and I feel so lucky to have been able to do that and write about it and research it and teach about it. So I am a librarian, but I am obviously in academia, and as Helen said, I work in the School of Information and Communication Studies in UCD, and I'm involved in undergraduate and postgraduate teaching, but I suppose in the context of this book and what I'm talking about today, it's my postgraduate teaching that's most relevant. I'm teaching on the MLIS program, and I think it was the first, but I was lucky enough to be able to create the first full module for teaching librarians in Ireland, and that was back in 2004, and it has run continuously. Obviously, it's changed over the years and developed, but I'm just about, in spring 2022, I'll be welcoming my 19th class of teaching librarians, which I feel so lucky. So I've had endless inspiration from those students over the years. They've taught me so much about teaching librarianship, and I've learned from them. And an awful lot of what I learn in those modules and teaching those modules each year, it feeds into the writing work that I do, particularly this book and previous books I've written. So I feel so lucky to be able to have that experience. I've always been interested in information literacy and teaching librarianship. This is 2 decades now. And my PhD actually was focused on the collaborative relationships between librarians and academic faculty in the context of teaching and learning support. So it's a long time, and I've been so lucky, I suppose, over the years to see how Ireland particularly has really come onto the map in terms of information literacy and the teaching work that librarians do, not just in academic librarianship, but all forms of librarianship. So all of it kind of comes together in these books that I write, and the journal articles that I write as well. I also teach digital literacy. Of course, you could argue what's the difference, information literacy, digital literacy, and that is a discussion we could have. But I do teach an undergraduate digital literacy module as well. And I use that as my laboratory to some extent in terms of kind of trying out different teaching methods and approaches, and seeing what will work, what doesn't work, and developing things there. So again, just another, I suppose, thread that runs into the writing work that I do. And my research focus really would be primarily on the scholarship of teaching and learning in the context of librarianship and information literacy instruction. I've been on a book publishing journey for the last 10 years, and I resonate so much with what Claire said about using the writing process as a distraction from other things that were going on in her life. So this is what happened when I wrote my first book around 2011. I actually kind of got into that, got immersed in that because of a bereavement when one of my parents died in 2009. So it was just after that when I was invited to write my first book for Chandos Publishing. And again, it was a blessing in disguise, really, that I was able to immerse myself in that. So that was 2011, and very much based around the module I teach on teaching librarianship. And I wrote it, I suppose, with the idea that it would support librarians who were learning how to teach, and it was kind of set out for them like that. I had a fantastic experience a couple of years later when I worked with one of my closest friends, Crystal, on a digital literacy textbook that was based on modules that we were teaching. So my first year module and Crystal's second year module on digital literacy. So we wrote a textbook to support that. And that was a very different experience, writing with somebody else. It takes a lot of the pressure off, for one thing, but it's just wonderful to be able to bounce ideas off each other and to kind of share what you're doing and all of that. So that was a great experience. And then to bring us to what I'm talking about today, the Academic Teaching Librarian's Handbook, which just has come out in January this year, is obviously with Facet, just like Claire. And I was, again, I'll explain how that came about, but that's my most recent work, and it's again a solo project, not written in collaboration with anyone. And just, I suppose, to talk about my experience with Facet, and very similar again to Claire's experience, that I was contacted on spec, and I agree with what Claire was saying about getting known for certain things. I suppose my work over the years and my teaching work and the other things that I've written has my name known in relation to teaching librarianship and all of that and information literacy. So somehow the commissioning editor in Facet Publishing found out about me and sent me an email. Now, I'm very suspicious by nature, I suppose, because I teach about digital literacy. And this was the same thing with my first book. I just got an email out of the blue. So the first thing I do when I get these kind of emails, you know, is kind of say, well, is this real? Or is this some sort of predatory publishing kind of thing? And so I went and I looked up this person and, you know, made sure that it was legitimate. It was a legitimate approach. And would I be interested in working with Facet? And this was June 2018. And this was actually quite timely because it was a couple of years since the publication of my book with Crystal. And I had started to kind of contemplate writing another book at this point. You know, should I, shouldn't I? Have I got more to say? You know, what kind of experience would that be? So I spoke with the editor who had contacted me. We kind of had a chat and I agreed that, well, maybe this is something that I could do. You know, I had some certain amount of time, not immediately, but kind of in the following year, I kind of figured I'd have some time. So I submitted a book proposal in mid-August 2018. And that was kind of the first step. And again, as Claire said, the proposal is a lengthy document. It requires you to basically put together the skeleton of the book that you will be writing, including everything from suggested titles to chapter titles to subheadings and all of that. So it really makes you think about what this book is going to be about and how it's going to look, you know, what it's going to contain. And the other thing that it asks you to do, and I found this difficult the first couple of times I did it, I suppose you get used to it, is to think about how this book is going to be different from other books that are on the market. What is it going to add? What are people going to get out of it that they won't get in other books? So that really makes you put your thinking cap on and consider the market as it is for your topic area and how you're going to add to that. And again, this is all a good exercise because it starts the work. It starts you thinking about how you're going to write and how you're going to put it all together. So the proposal was accepted for publication and I signed the book contract in late August. I didn't start writing until a few months later because it was that period of time where I took over the headship of our school just for a temporary period. And I made this really clear to my editor that I'm simply not going to have the time to start writing this book until I'm finished with this responsibility. And that was fine. There were no problems with that. So I sat down and I had the blank screen in front of me, and that was in early 2019 when I had discharged that responsibility. However, I had an elbow injury, a repetitive strain injury, that really made it difficult to sit and write for long periods and type at a computer. So I was slowed right down at that point, and I found it really, really difficult to write for long periods of time. So that was one thing. And then the other thing that in December 2018, there were some absolutely huge staff changes at Facet Publishing itself. The editor who had recruited me was leaving his post. And then I think the overall editor also left. So there was a vacancy there. There was actually no editor until July. So I'll be honest, I felt somewhat in limbo for a few months. I wasn't sure exactly what was happening with Facet. I wasn't even sure who to contact because my main contact had left. So it was a little bit, I suppose, discombobulating. to coin a phrase. However, I decided I was just going to keep on at it, keep on going and just see how it transpired. But then eventually an editor was recruited and I was in contact with him from July and everything fell into place again. But I did need to request a 6-month extension because of my elbow injury. I couldn't write as quickly as I wanted to. And to be honest, I found it hard going. I just found it hard to kind of switch back into that mode of really continuous steady writing. And also when you write a book, it's not just about sitting down and starting to write. You do have to do research around your topic and to kind of make sure you're up to speed with the literature. And Claire just spoke about being thrown by, you know, a curveball that came in with major changes in her field. you know, you have to be aware of all this and, you know, things that are going on, and just to kind of make sure you're on top of your game. So I was researching and writing, and I found it quite a slog, I'll be honest. But I did kind of start to pick up pace from summer 2019. I started to feel a little more confident. And it's true, when you have actual text in front of you, when you have drafts and chapters, headings, and you can kind of see it coming together, it does feel a little bit easier, but it's never easy per se. And it's always quite hard work. What really does help is having that skeleton of the book's content that you put together in the proposal, because that is, then it almost feels like you're kind of filling in the gaps. You know, you have your structure, you have your headings, and that really gives you kind of something to aim for. But I will say that I did change the structure as I wrote, because the original structure I had didn't feel right when I started writing. It didn't fit together well, it didn't connect well. So I did make quite big changes to the structure as I went along, which I suppose made things a little more difficult. But there it was. I finally and fully completed the manuscript at the end of June 2020, so right in the middle of the pandemic. And I remember submitting that day and just literally flopping on the couch, just completely and utterly drained after the year. I never thought I would pick up a pen or sit down at a keyboard again at that point. But I did submit the full manuscript. Now, I had been submitting chapters to the editor as I went along. I kind of made myself do that. And it was almost like ticking off a checklist each chapter. And I wrote in sequence pretty much according to the structure, or the revised structure that I had. So I did that. And then the proofs arrived in October 2020. And I chose to create my own index. You do have a choice whether you can ask them to hire somebody to do that for you and take the fee out of your royalties, your future royalties. But I chose to do it myself because I had done it before for my other books. And it's something that I really, really enjoy. And then eventually FASA did ask me to write a blog post about my experience of creating an index, which I think is on their website somewhere. So it is something, and it also gives you a real sense of closure with your book as well. You know it best, and this is the final task before publication. So it's actually something that's quite enjoyable. Finally, it was published, hooray, on January 22nd, 2021. It took absolutely ages for me to get my print copies. I think maybe to do with Brexit, to do with pandemic delays, to do with Christmas delivery delays, because it was over that period. But eventually they arrived, and there is Merlin sitting on the books. Everything that comes into the house, he has to be involved in. So up he got onto the box of books when they arrived in January, or it's actually February when they arrived, quite a few weeks after the official publication date. So just in terms of, very quickly, because I know I'm just conscious of time here, and I want to fly through it, just to, I'll pull all the different points up together there, just to explain how I developed the book, because, you know, having the idea for a book is almost the hardest part, coming up with the idea and coming up with, you know, what it's going to be about. And I had been inspired by work I was doing in the MLIS program around professional identity and reflective practice in our new capstone module that we revamped in 2016. You know, how does a librarian become a teacher, and what does it actually mean to be a teacher if you're a librarian? And also the new ACRL framework that came out in 2017, the roles and strengths of teaching librarians, a much more nuanced conceptualization of teaching librarianship, rather than like a list of skills and abilities. It was kind of more about roles and the dispositions that you need to excel in those roles. And I've always been interested in this process of becoming and identifying as a teacher, you know, and how that develops over your whole career. So I framed the book around this kind of idea of development and evolving as a teaching librarian, where you kind of decide to become one and the processes you go through around that. And then as you move through your career, maybe into management roles and advocacy roles, how you excel then as an academic teaching librarian. And that was developing. So it's in two parts, 3 chapters for each part. And that's kind of how it worked. And reflection is a constant theme throughout that. We have exercises and pauses, and where I encourage the reader to kind of think about what they've just read and to apply it to their own experience. Just a few helpful hints then, and some of which mirror Claire's kind of tips as well. I'll pull them all up together. Just again, I'm conscious of time. I think, and Claire did allude to this as well, the idea of open access, and it's something I, of course, think about and, you know, worry about. That, you know, you are writing for a commercial publisher and all of what that entails. And again, like Claire, I felt it is part of CILIP, it's part of Library Association. So I felt that's kind of the closest I could get to kind of, you know, contributing to the librarianship rather than kind of choosing other publishers. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to work with Facet, and I chose Facet. But you have to consider your publisher carefully. If you are not approached, if you are going out on spec yourself, look at their catalogue and kind of consider what other types of books they publish, and will yours fit in with that. And as I said, it's so helpful at the proposal stage to be as detailed as you possibly can, that you have your full chapter headings, your section headings, your subheadings, you know, really try to get a full visualization of that book from the very start. And that will help you as you kind of delve into the writing process, because you are filling in the structure as you go along then. And think very, very strongly about what makes your book different to others on the market. You know, what will people get from this? Why are you writing this? You have to do this anyway in your proposal. So it's a useful exercise to keep you motivated and to keep you focused on what you're trying to achieve. Similarly, you know, put yourself in the shoes of the reader. Why would somebody pick up your book or borrow it from the library or choose to read it? You know, what will they get out of it? Who are they? Who is your audience? And what do you want? It's like when you're developing a teaching program, you know, what's the outcome that you want for the end for your students? And, you know, what will they get out of it? Write freely, but edit ruthlessly. And this is easier said than done, I think. You know, it's hard to get started. And then once you get started, it can be hard to stop and cut back and, you know, edit. Always kind of keep a vague idea of the word count. There is some flexibility around word counts, I have found, but kind of keep a vague idea, and even to the point of view of maybe deciding word counts for each of your chapters. That I found that helpful in keeping me focused. Send chapters to editors for review and to colleagues and helpful friends if they're willing to read it for you. Some editors might request you to do that, and I think it's a good exercise to keep you on target. And as Claire says, extensions. I really didn't want to. I hadn't ever before requested an extension for books, but this time I needed one. And I found, even though I didn't want to, I found that it's not the end of the world, that most publishers are very, very flexible and helpful when it comes to life getting in the way. And it really isn't the end of the world if you need an extension, so do request it. And then consider preparing your own index. You know your book best. You know the access points that people will need for your book. You know what people will get out of your book and how they might approach it. So consider doing that yourself if the opportunity arises, rather than getting somebody else to do it for you. And just to say thank you so much. I think we're at the end of time, so always feel free to contact me with questions. There's my email address, and I'll just hand you back to Helen now. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Claire. And that's really, it was really interesting and really complimented what Claire said. So two terrific presentations.